In 100 years' time, this moment will be written about in the history books. It will be the moment when the world begins to realize that the Pentagon, gatekeepers of this legacy program, made a terrible mistake. They flat out lied. And now we're going to catch them out on that lie. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and others, you are lying. And now we've caught them red-handed. A former senior, very senior intelligence officer with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Organization. And he revealed to me exclusively on television the shocking revelation that we are not alone. For the first time, an intelligence insider revealed the existence of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet. He also acknowledged that it was true that the United States...
It's probably nothing new.
States government has been involved in what are referred to euphemistically as crash retrievals.
So we've been involved in crash retrievals.
And that there is a retrieval program ongoing of non-human technology. There's also a reverse engineering program, a program...
So we've been involved in crash retrievals and reverse engineering technology of non-human origin. Make of that what you will.
Underway inside the US government and private aerospace that is one of the highest kept secrets in the US government. It's a program to attempt to back engineer recovered exotic non-human technology. And what they're appalled about is that there has been an egregious failure that has gone on now for decades inside the national security establishment, which has concealed the existence of a legacy retrieval and reverse engineering program. Now, I know that sounds utterly absurd, and there will be the debunkers and the trolls who suggest that this is all a delusion. But as you'll hear today from a direct first-hand witness to the existence of that retrieval program, there is direct evidence. At the heart of my concern with the UAP issue is the kind of BS that happened last week when the Arrow Historical Review report was tabled in the Congress and presented to the public, for the public to see. I knew that this pile of steaming dog turd was going to be a cover-up.
If you've been following this topic for a while, you've probably read about the Robertson panel, which was formed in the 1950s. Now, this is declassified report, but you can search it up online. This panel was formed to disinform and disenfranchise about anyone that is trying to speak up on this topic.
Because as you will hear today, what has been done in the presentation of that report to Congress is a flagrant breach of an extremely important executive order made by President Reagan, Executive Order 12333. This executive order, among other things, forbids the use by the intelligence community of any covert action influence campaign on either the media or public opinion. And now we've caught them red-handed. In 100 years' time, this moment will be written about in the history books. It will be the moment when the world begins to realize that the Pentagon, gatekeepers of this legacy program, made a terrible mistake. They flat out lied. And now we're going to catch them out on that lie. It's now up to Congress to test the veracity of what you're about to hear from attorney Daniel Sheehan. Daniel Sheehan is about to make an incredibly dramatic allegation. He is going to allege that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the Pentagon's UFO office, has lied to Congress.
Happens a lot here.
There were certain named companies that were alleged to be experimenting on alien technology.
It has to be private or defense companies.
Arrow said, quote, Arrow has found no evidence that US companies ever possessed off-world technology. The executives, scientists and chief technology officers of the companies named by interviewees met with the director of Arrow and denied on the record that they have ever recovered, possessed or engaged in reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology.
Let's see what Ross has to
Now,
say.
I'm going to call them out, as will others very soon, on that lie. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and others, you are lying. And we know you're lying because we're talking to people inside your organizations who say you're lying. This lie is protected by what's called a waived, unacknowledged special access program, which essentially means the dirtiest secret of all. And these WUSAPs require anyone read into these programs to lie. I want to get straight away, Danny, to a story you've told before, but which I think most Americans are completely unaware of. And it's a story of how you were retained by Marcia Smith from the Congressional Research Service to do some work for President Jimmy Carter into the UAP issue. And before we get to the...
So Danny Sheehan did some work for Jimmy Carter. Interesting.
When President Jimmy Carter asked to be briefed on the UAP mystery.
Right. Well, what happened, Ross, is that President Carter was elected like on November 4th of 1976. And right by the 19th of November, even before he'd been sworn in, one of the first things he did is he sent word to have the CIA director come down to Plains, Georgia, to his home and brief him personally at his home about the UFO issue. It turns out that the CIA director at that time was George H.W. Bush. And George H.W. Bush refused to give him the information.
So George Bush basically told him he doesn't have a need to know. That's rough.
George Bush told him that as the elected president, he had no reason to know. So what President Carter did is instead he contacted the Congress. I was contacted by Marcia Smith, who was the director of the Congressional Research Service Science and Technology Division, and asked to become special counsel.
As I understood it, you insisted on being given access to the hitherto unreleased, secret, unreleased Project Blue Book files. And incredibly, they agreed to do that. Tell me what happened that day when you went to the Madison building in the National Archives. What happened?
And I came to the building. I was surprised that nobody had even occupied the building yet. It was brand new. It had just gotten built. And there were these two suits standing outside of the door waiting for me.
Two suits. I think he is referring to guards.
They demanded to see both forms of my identification, and I showed them both, and then they showed me in. So I went into the hallway, and they said, go down the hallway to the right, and you'll see an elevator there on the left. And you go down into the basement, and you'll see the place to go. I got out, and it was dark down there. There weren't lights on, but I could see down the hall. I could see a light coming out of a room, and there were these two other suits. These guys, both of them demanded to see my two forms of identification. It was sort of like they resented my even being there. But I showed them, and they said, look, leave that briefcase here. You can't take any notes. You can't record anything. And so I put the briefcase down.
So he wasn't allowed to record or take any notes, but they gave him permission to see them. What did he do?
Yes.
So I just want to set the scene for this. This is you, Daniel Sheehan, being given access to the darkest, deepest secrets in the American military-industrial complex. You've asked for and been given access to the UFO files, the secret files of Project Blue Book, the files the government denies exists. What did you find?
Well, what I did is I walked in, and I was in this comparatively small room. It was about maybe 20 feet wide and about 12 feet or so deep. And there were these 3 big cardboard fold-out tables. And they had like shoeboxes, these little light green, kind of government green shoeboxes with the little ties on them. And there was a microfiche machine that was there. And so I sat down and I took the yellow pad out and I slid it over behind one of the boxes so that if they looked in, they wouldn't see it. And I opened up the first box and they had these little film canisters of microfiche film. So I took the first one out and I put it into this old-timey microfiche machine and started cranking it and looking at it. It was all these documents. And I said, I don't know how long they're going to allow me to stay in here. And so I said, if I start reading each one of these documents as a lawyer, it's going to take forever. So I sort of cranked through them to see if there were any photographs anywhere. Nothing was there in the first canister. And so I folded it all up and put it back in.
So the only thing he was looking for was photographs.
And then I got to the third canister, I think it was, and part way in, there it was. Here was this series of photographs, black and white photographs of a crashed flying saucer. There wasn't any doubt about what it was. It was a winter scene. There was snow on the ground, and the saucer, it was a classic large disc saucer, about 40, 50 feet across, with a big dome on the top of it. And it had hit into this snow-covered field and it plowed this big ditch all the way across the field, like the earth was all turned up and it was stuck into the side of this big snow-covered embankment, stuck in there like at a 45-degree angle, just stuck in the side of the hill. And I could see all around it, there were these Air Force personnel. They were in winter jackets, with the big fur around the hood, and they were taking photographs of it. And I actually saw one of the guys in one of the photos. There were like 3 of them that I saw the photos, and they had one of these old-timey cameras, a movie camera, like with the 2 big round canisters on the top of them. So it must have been like in like the late 40s or early 50s or something, I figured. And so that and then all of a sudden I realized that in one of the photos I could see around the bottom of the dome of the crash saucer that was stuck in the embankment, these symbols. And I looked at them and I said, wow, look at those. There's nothing like anything I've ever seen. They're not Russian. They're not Chinese. They're not, hieroglyphics. They're totally unique. So I said, okay, I'm going to trace these because I want to make sure they're absolutely identical to what is there and that they're in the exact sequence that they're in. And so I did is I took out the yellow.
These are top secret files, Danny. Isn't that an act of espionage?
Well, no, I'd been cleared to see them. And so what I did is I took out the yellow pad, and interestingly enough, it's just one of those instinctive things. I opened up the yellow pad to the inside cardboard backing. And what I did is I pushed the backing underneath the microfiche machine and then focused the microfiche right onto the inside cover of the yellow pad so that I traced them identically, absolutely, totally accurately, every single one of them.
How did he manage to trace these symbols? I don't get it. Can please someone explain?
And there must have been about 8 or 10 of them that were all obvious. So I traced them in detail, and I got them all done. I kept looking up to see if anybody was watching. And so I got all done, and I closed the yellow pad, and I said, that's it. I got it. That's a UFO, man. And look, it's got all these unique symbols on them. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the stuff away. I put the little microfiche away, put it back in the box, took the yellow pad, stood up, and put it under my arm. I have my suit on, and I didn't put it inside my suit to try to hide it. I just stuck it under my arm. And I turned around and got up and walked out.
So that is 1976 when that happened?
77. That was the spring of 77. This all happened. He got elected in November 76. On November 19th is when he confronted Bush and was refused the information. This was like early spring of 1977.
So 44 years ago, you got to see what you believe is categorical evidence of a crash retrieval, of a non-human craft.
There it is.
Well, I knew that these symbols were not from anything I'd ever seen on the planet, and I had a fairly extensive history. But as I say, I knew they weren't Chinese, they weren't Russian, they weren't Hindu, they weren't anything that I'd ever seen. I'd seen a significant amount of things. I studied foreign policy at Harvard College under Henry Kissinger. I studied theology and stuff at the Harvard Divinity School. I'd studied different legal texts. I was, in fact, the legal research assistant for Professor Jerome Cohen, who was the head of the International Law Department at Harvard.
Now, you're very sure it was US Air Force personnel in what presumably sounded like 1940s uniforms standing around what appeared to be a retrieved flying saucer.
Yes, that's right. Because I recognized the winter garb because I was going to go to the Air Force Academy. So I was pretty familiar with Air Force garb, etc. I said, these are Air Force guys.
So the Air Force had knowledge of this back in the 1940s. What he's actually saying.
But what's important about this, Danny, is that is, if I'm not mistaken, that is first-hand direct witness evidence from you of a UAP, a flying saucer, a non-human craft.
Well, it was exactly as I said. That I was. There's no doubt that it was a flying saucer. That was absolutely clear, and there wasn't any doubt that it was crashed, and it wasn't any doubt that there were no symbols of anything on Earth that were on it. That much I know.
Why do you think? Why do you think they gave you access? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I can't think of any other time in history when anyone from outside of the legacy program has been given access to data, to evidence of the existence of such a program.
I was surprised. So was Dr. Marshall Smith. When I asked her, she said, "What kind of information would you like to see?" And I said, I knew immediately. I said, I want to see the classified portions of Project Blue Book. I know that there's over 700 sightings that they were unable totally to rationalize away. And those are the ones that she said, oh, they'll never give you that. They'll never give you that. I said, well, look, if we don't ask, we'll never get them.
I would have thought if President Jimmy Carter ordered the CIA director, even if it was George Herbert Walker Bush, to give information on the UAP issue, I would have thought that he would have jumped to attention and said, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, and given him all the detail he needs. Am I being very naive here?
Well, I won't comment on whether you're being naive, but I will say this, is that that's exactly what I was told had happened.
So can I ask this? You were briefed eventually about the report that went to President Carter. Was President Carter given any detail about what you had discovered in the National Archives building that day when you were given access to the classified portion of the Project Blue Book files?
Well, actually, that's one of the peculiar facts about all this, Ross, is that what happened is I was so thunderstruck by what I saw. What I did is I took it back to Jesuit headquarters, and I gave it to Father William J. Davis, who was my Jesuit superior.
So it's your belief that even the president wasn't told about what you discovered, that the report withheld that information, that direct first-hand evidence of what you'd seen in those documents in the Madison building in the National Archives?
So Jimmy Carter got denied, had a briefing denied from George Bush, and also the report that Marcia Smith concluded at the end of Danny's investigation. And at the end, he didn't find out.
Wow. Now, I'm fascinated. I want to know, did you, when the opportunity came with the creation of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, did you go to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick at the ARROW, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, as a first-hand direct witness? Did you provide that information to ARROW of what you'd seen?
I did. I absolutely did. I was talking with Chris Mellon about this, and Chris said, look, he's going to contact Sean Kirkpatrick directly and take the position that Sean needs to interview me. And so I got contacted by Dr. Fitzpatrick and asked to go.
I think this is super important.
Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick said as recently as last Friday in the report that was written to Congress that no direct first-hand evidence with knowledge of a retrieval program was provided to Arrow. What he says in that document, under oath presumably to Congress or under some prescription about telling the truth, what he says to Congress is the complete opposite of what you're telling me now here today.
That's true. That's true. No, he was told personally because he's the one that conducted the interview of me. And I gave him all the exact same.
I don't want to drag you into a defamation case, Danny, but this is a very, very important point. Yeah. There are obligations on officers of the state, people acting under congressional rule legislation. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was operating according to law, tasked by statute of Congress to prepare a truthful and accurate report. Now, I'm asking you, did Dr. Kirkpatrick lie when he gave you, did Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick lie when he made the assertion that there was no direct first-hand witness evidence provided to Arrow of a crash retrieval?
I provided him under oath the exact same information that I've given to you. And the question is whether he was taking some weird position that, well, that was a photograph and it wasn't on site, but I didn't lay my hands on the craft. You know, and I could tell from the way the report.
Fair point. That's a fair point.
Report was written, it was kind of wiggle language of trying to pretend that somehow they had no direct evidence. But from a court of law, as a 50-year practicing attorney from Harvard Law School, I can tell you that is direct admissible firsthand testimony about the fact that there is direct visual photographic evidence of a crash retrieval program directly being undertaken by government officials. And he knows that it existed.
So, sir, I need to get an express statement from you. Yeah. What is your position about the truthfulness of Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick in the evidence he gave last week to Congress?
I think that it was a transparent, willful, conscious lie, just like Project Blue Book was. Absolutely. And I know that,
so
too.
You're accusing an officer of the government. You're accusing somebody who's been statutorily tasked by Congress to prepare a report. You're saying that that particular official, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, lied categorically to the Congress.
Yes, he did.
Wow.
That's a lot. That's a lot on its own. Let's continue.
I mean, that's a very, very grave allegation. You'd be prepared to testify about that to Congress and to a court?
Sure. No, absolutely. And then he would have to try to argue whether he said, what his explanation was as to why that wasn't, sustainable proof.
So let's there be no mistake about this. You see what happened last week with the report that was presented to Congress as a fraud. You think that the public are being lied to, and you have direct first-hand witness evidence that you're prepared to testify about to Congress, which proves that lie.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm perfectly willing to testify to Congress about the first-hand direct photographic evidence that I saw of the crash retrieval of a UFO, which I'm convinced because of the symbols on it, we're not part of any nation state on our planet, and that I told this under oath directly to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick.
Not just the symbols, but was the direct evidence of a crashed flying saucer sitting there.
As is an official Arrow investigative hearing, which we pushed on him.
And look, forgive me for having to challenge you on this, but this isn't some BS story on your part. You're actually saying this happened. You were given access, quite extraordinarily, to direct evidence that the United States government is aware of retrieved, potentially non-human craft, flying saucers.
That's right.